Good afternoon, and welcome to the Harvard Business School Club of San Diego's CEO Forum. My name's Edward Hughes. I'm the president of the HBS Club of San Diego, and I'm delighted to welcome not only our members, but other HBS Club members from around the world. We've invited you to this, hopefully, a very interesting topic. Many of you over the weekend would have probably watched the Masters, and what a fantastic golf tournament that is. And it seems that every time we have a CEO or a significant person related to golf, we get lots of people joining us. So we're thrilled to have our guest today. But before I introduce our guest, let me say a few things. Firstly, thank you again to our sponsors, Hughes Marino, KPMG, Latham Watkins. We appreciate the support, and the Honor Foundation, who serves Navy Special Forces. We appreciate the work and the collaboration we do with you as well. So our mission as a club is to continue to educate leaders who make a difference in the world and make San Diego a great place to live and work. I know that many of you are not from San Diego on this call, so I know your clubs have similar missions, but we do this through a couple of different ways. Firstly is that we have our CEO Forum, and our CEO Forum is where we invite distinguished guests, normally CEOs of companies, to come and talk a bit about their industry, their company, and what's going on. And as you can see here, this is our most recent list of CEOs. We've had a nice diversity from Stone Brewing, Callaway Golf, Cirrus Aircraft, former Navy SEAL, a number of HBS professors, CEO of TaylorMade, Flock Freight. Recently, we had the CEO of the San Diego Football Club, which is an expansion team in the MLS. And last month, we had Professor Christine Wallace. As I say, it's, I personally enjoy sports. And so having the opportunity to talk to the CEO of Callaway or the CEO of TaylorMade is always great. And we get a great response from people coming to do that. So, but we're not here just to talk about sports. We're here to talk about the business of sports. And obviously, that's something we'll cover a little bit today. The second thing we do in terms of making San Diego a great place to live and work is we are a big believer in supporting social enterprise and local nonprofits. And over the last 15 or so years, we've invested about $550,000 in a combination of management education, where we are sending CEOs from local San Diego companies, nonprofits, back to Boston for a week-long program called Strategic Perspectives in Nonprofit Management. And we're also giving some cash donations to help nonprofits here in San Diego. We've done the CEO program with the nonprofit leaders for the last 18 years. We've sent 44 of them. This year, we had the applications closed on March 31st. I believe we ended up with 15 applicants, which is fantastic. We'll probably have 2 spots. So all of you who made recommendations, we appreciate that. We've got a great pool of candidates that we're going to be interviewing over the next couple of weeks. Last year, we had the opportunity to send 3 fantastic CEOs, John Van Cleef, CEO of Community Resource Center, Todd Tibbetts, President and CEO of the YMCA of San Diego County, and Drew Moser, Executive Director of the Lucky Duck Foundation. So at our next webinar session, I'll let you know who we're going to be sending this year. One of the things that we've done, and since COVID, it's kind of been interesting, most of our programming has gone online. We used to do a lot of in-person type events, breakfasts, lunches, etc. But with COVID, people have come very used to kind of hopping online, getting a great content, great webinar from that. So we're going to continue doing that. So the number of in-person events has kind of dropped off. But however, we think it's very important to still have a very strong membership number in our community. And so last month, we announced that basically, if you're an HBS alum, you're going to get an automatic complimentary membership. We've extended that for another 6 months. We think it's important to have that and have people joining our events, even if they are online. What we do ask, and again, it's voluntary, if you think you're getting great value out of the HBS Club, instead of the membership dues, which were relatively nominal, make your donation to our Spinum funds. This is a Strategic Perspectives in Nonprofit Management, and it helps us fund some great CEOs to go back to HBS to get some phenomenal training. So today's format, because of the number of guests we have, we are going to do it in a webinar format. So you're all going to be muted, except for our guest. But however, please feel free to type in questions, and I'll try to get to as many questions as I can. So with that, let me stop sharing and introduce our guest. And I'm going to do this via a story. So I used to be in the golf industry. I used to run a company called Max Fly Golf. And Back in 97, it was my first year. I joined Maxfly in 96, and in 97, we went to the Masters. As an equipment manufacturer, we had some phenomenal tickets and had the opportunity to meet there. And there was a lot of meetings that go on in the golf industry under the big oak tree right outside the clubhouse. And so I'm there with my head of tour, and Tiger's just come out and there's a tremendous buzz going on. And I see this guy wandering backwards and forwards, and everywhere he's going, he's got people, following him. And so I turned to my tour director, Robin English, and I said, "Who's that guy?" He goes, "Oh, that's Hughes Norton." And I go, "Who's Hughes Norton?" He goes, "Oh, he's the IMG guy. He's a super agent, right? He's Tiger's agent, right? And he's the guy who's jacking up all our costs because he's, raising all the prices for all these tour players. Oh, he's a real son up." And I was like, "Oh, okay. All right." So anyway, I happened to shake his hand. And he obviously went on to some great things. And then a few weeks ago, I read a preview of a book coming out called The Rainmaker, which you can see here. And I thought, great, I love stories about golf. He managed Greg Norman. We had Greg Norman as one of our players. We had Jack Nicklaus and Tom Watson and Greg Norman, etc. And he managed Greg. So I thought, let me read this story. So I get the book, and I realized he's an HBS grad. I didn't know that. He went to Section A. All good guys go to Section A. Sorry for everybody else who's on that call, who's not Section A, right? And he got into the golf industry. And so I read the book, and it was absolutely fascinating. So, and this guy was at the pinnacle. And then suddenly, after a couple of years, I didn't hear much about him. And he explained what happened in the book. So through our HBS alumni network, I pinged him. And I said, Hughes, we're HBS grads. I've been in the golf industry. I'd love to have you on a webinar. Same day he responds, "I'd love to do it." So I am delighted to have Hughes Norton join us today. He is the super agent that is known for work he did at IMG, work he did with Greg Norman, with Tiger Woods, etc. So Hughes, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Ed, thank you so much. Wonderful introduction, and I'm delighted to be here with you.
Oh, we're thrilled. So the book, let's start with that, all right? The Rainmaker. So we get the pictures. Why now, and why this book?
Why now is seems to just be a symmetrical sort of point in my life. I'm 75 years old. It's the 50th anniversary since I joined IMG, the International Management Group, and it's the 25th anniversary since both Tiger Woods and the founder of IMG, Mark McCormick, fired me. So it just seemed like the numbers all kind of aligned. I thought to myself, if I don't do it now, when am I ever going to do it? I had a great collaborator. Anyone in the golf industry, you'll remember him, Ed, named George Pepper,
Yep.
was the editor of Golf Magazine. And the beauty of collaborating with George on a book like this is that he lived through the era with me, just like you were there at Augusta. George was there all during the 70s, 80s, and 90s with me because he was the editor of Golf Magazine. He's an incredibly talented writer, the best in the golf business, in my opinion. But the beauty of it was because he lived through the era with me and knew me so well, and we were frequently adversaries on the other side of the negotiating table, as well as friends and fellow golfers together. The beauty of it was that he could authenticate my voice better than any other writer that I could possibly imagine. And in an autobiography, that's pretty important. So it was a wonderful marriage from the start. George remembered a lot of things where my memory 25 years later got a little spacey. And why the book? We've done the why now. There's really never been a book about what it's like being a sports agent. That sounds crazy. And people will say, well, what about Jerry Maguire? And what about Air, this latest movie about Nike and the sports agents and that? They're really all caricatures, Ed. There's never been a story about the behind the scenes. It all seems glitzy and glamorous on the outside, but the blocking and tackling that a sports agent, in my case, golf, does on a regular basis. Remarkably, there's also never been a history of IMG, the sports management company that Mark McCormick founded in Cleveland in the early 60s, and which set the bar for the rest of the sports management agency for 3 decades. The other part of it, and this is sort of the third thread of the narrative, there's my agency on behalf of people like Tiger and Greg, which is always kind of fascinating to people. There's the history of sports management to the extent we could do it with IMG. And then the third thread that a lot of people really have expressed appreciation for so far is the growth of professional golf. And we chronicle it from the early 70s when I first went out there. The Pro Tour was a mom and pop operation, honestly, compared to this billion-dollar behemoth that it's become, particularly now in the age of LIV and the Saudis. So all three of those elements kind of come together to make, I think, a fascinating book for anybody who follows golf, who plays golf, who likes golf, will really enjoy.
Well, it was beautifully written, and I learned a lot of great stuff. So I'm going to try and get this into three kind of buckets of questions. I'm going to talk a bit about your early years. Then we'll go into IMG and what happened there and the growth and all the exciting stuff, etc. And then the ending for you for IMG. And then we'll talk a bit about kind of the state of the golf industry now, or golf now and LIV. So you were a keen golfer, right? And I read that you wanted to get into sports media. So how did HBS come along?
Serendipitous, for sure. I graduated from Yale. That was during the Vietnam era. I was about to be drafted. I went into the Army, the reserves, actually. So I had a year of active duty. During that time, I applied to both law schools and business schools. But the more I thought about it, I thought business was more aligned with my personality. And also a 2-year program instead of 3. I was lucky enough to get into Harvard Business School, and just went there and was about to come out of there with just a general template for a business career, not really knowing what it was going to be. And the experience there was phenomenal. You've been through it, Ed. People say to me, "What did you really learn at Harvard Business School?" We could go on and on for hours, you and I. But the fact of the matter is, for me, it taught me in spades every single night with those 3 cases how to get to the bottom line. What were the 2 or 3 most important things in this industry, in this company, in this case? And sort of getting rid of all the detail and getting down to the rock bottom really taught me a great way of thinking. Not to mention the fact that, as you remember, we'd have 3 cases. One would be 200 pages, one would be 100 pages, and one might be 20 pages. You had to go through all of those, and you kind of learned you never would be as prepared as you wanted to be. And of course, that's how business life is, or was for me. But you just kind of distill down to the most important stuff. And met McCormick there. Mark, it was early days still for IMG, but he came and did a lecture. And I'm sitting there in the audience thinking to myself, sports management, I've never heard of that. You can actually make a career in sports. Well, who wouldn't find that appealing? So one thing led to another. I ended up with 2 job opportunities, actually. One at Capital Cities Broadcasting, which at the time was kind of just getting started, but went on to phenomenal success under an HBS graduate. The chairman was named Tom Murphy, famous guy in the broadcasting business. Company ended up buying ABC and being sold itself for billions of dollars. So that was my road not taken, if you will. But I decided that sports and the kind of fun, my thought was, you can really do that as a job. Who wouldn't want to be in sports? And maybe that's what led you to Dunlop and all your career. But that's how it all came about. Had a quick interview with Mark. He hired me not in any particular line capacity. I was a staff guy. I was his personal assistant for about 3 months. And some circumstances happened in the company where they needed somebody on the golf tour. Mark said, "Hey, Hughes, you love golf. You played golf in college. How'd you like to do that?" I said, "Sure, let's go."
So Mark McCormack, I mean, at least in my perspective, largely created that sports management industry. So, I mean, I think he got his start with Arnold Palmer, and then he got Nicklaus and Player. So how was that? How was it to work with a guy like that?
Mark was a lawyer in Cleveland. He had a great line, which we quote in the book. He went to Yale Law School, took a job in Cleveland at an old established law firm here, and said, very quickly, I discovered I really wasn't that excited about being a lawyer. There were all these 80-year-old guys shuffling around the halls, and when someone died, we all changed offices. That's kind of an interesting take on the legal profession. But he was entrepreneurially inclined, and started. He loved golf. He qualified for the U.S. Open himself once and played in 2 U.S. amateurs. Very good golfer. and kind of a side gig while he was still practicing law, he and another fellow here in town formed a little company where they organized exhibitions for tour golfers. So Arnold Palmer and Gary Player would go to a Portland, Maine, for example, where there was no pro golf, and there was very little television coverage of golf in those days. So here was a chance for people in smaller communities around the country to experience, live and in person, professional golfers. And it was quite a lucrative side enterprise for golfers in those days. The prize money on the tour was tiny. Most golfers, if you can believe it, in the 50s were playing for one goal, and it wasn't to win millions and millions of dollars as you can do today in a very short time. It was to play well enough to get a club job where they could retire to a prestigious place like Wingfoot or Medina in Chicago, whatever it happened to be, Chicago Golf Club, and be a head pro. That was kind of the state of pro golf, if you can believe it. A lot different than it is today.
I was going to say, yeah, these guys are not going that way now. So, and the first guy you signed was Arnold Palmer, right?
Yeah. And so Mark he went to Princeton for one semester, dropped out. I never found out why. Ended up at William and Mary. William and Mary on the golf team. Mark was a player, and they played, among other schools, Wake Forest. Well, there was a guy named Arnold Palmer who played #1 for Wake Forest. Mark didn't play #1. He never played against Arnold in college, but they kind of met briefly, got to know each other. 6 years went by. Mark went on to law school, did a stint in the military, stationed in Augusta, Georgia, which is pretty amazing. Wow. he got put there, and he snuck in a few rounds at Augusta National in those days. And then when Mark and this other guy in Cleveland put this business together to stage exhibitions, Arnold was one of the first guys that he recruited. Arnold had won the Masters in 1958, was becoming a real star on the Pro Tour. And there were lots of other players they were doing exhibitions for too. Fast forward to 1960, Arnold wins the Masters again, two out of 3 years, and came to Mark and said, look, this is getting beyond me, all this outside stuff. I don't know what's a good contract. I don't know if I should be with Wilson Sporting Goods or with somebody else. The clothing that I wear, is this the right line of stuff I should do? What other opportunities are there? I'm too busy being a pro golfer to even think about the outside stuff. Would you be willing to handle that for me? And that was the critical moment in the growth of sports management, the genesis of sports management, really. And it was a golden handshake. It's been referred to for years. In the 50 years that Mark and Arnold worked together, there was never a piece of paper signed between them. Wow. Arnold Palmer's, word was his bond. He said, a handshake's good enough for me, Mark. How about you? And Mark, of course, the lawyer, probably swallowed and thought, okay, Arnold, that's the way you want it. Shortly thereafter, a very talented international player, Gary Player, showed up on the scene, winning tournaments all over the world. He became Mark's second client. And in 1961, Jack Nicklaus, who was by far the most promising amateur at that time to come along, nearly won the U.S. Open as an amateur in 1960, the year that Arnold won at Cherry Hills. Nicklaus turned pro and became Arnold's third client. And we chronicle all this in the book. There's some great stuff about Jack in those days said to Mark, I'm really not sure if I want to turn pro. I'm making $6,000 a year now, Mark, selling life insurance. I think if I can do a little better in that field, I probably would be better off. I mean, think of that.
Wow.
So
history would be totally different, right?
Totally. And all of a sudden, Mark's first clients are the big three that were winning everything in sight. Those three golfers won 7 of the 10 Masters in the 1960s. I mean, Mark realized, to his credit, that he had hit the lottery, that this was never going to happen again. Of all the hundreds of pro golfers he could have started out with, there he is with these three. And a critical moment occurred in the growth of IMG and in the ultimate growth of sports management. Mark described it as, I could have had a really comfortable, fun life representing these three guys, making a lot of money doing so, friends with them all, playing a lot of golf with them. That would have been a great career. But he had this nagging feeling that if he could help professional golfers the way that he had expanded the horizons of these three, you could certainly do so for all the other athletes in the world, tennis players, team sport athletes, etc. So he decided to take IMG into other fields and go beyond golf and do the same thing for other athletes that he'd done for Arnold, Jack, and Gary.
And so when you joined coming out of HBS, you joined as his personal assistant. So you probably got involved in not just golf stuff, but random stuff that he wanted to hand off to somebody else, right?
Well, like, he said, you're an HBS MBA, analyze our whole expansion strategy. Do we have too many foreign offices? Do we not have enough? What should be with that? Another project was a golf course design. We were just getting into it in those days. And, give me a report on the whole golf design business. It was totally a staff job. And I thought, okay, I never had any thoughts about being an agent, certainly at the beginning. And as I said, circumstances aligned to where they needed somebody on the golf tour. And Mark, with no manual, with no how-to, with no no really instruction, said, "Good luck. You'll figure it out there. I got to fly to Europe. Have fun." So I went out on the tour in 1972.
And so did you start with any clients? Do you had to go build your own book, or what was it?
We did. We had a base of clients. We had a guy named Tommy Aaron, who won the Masters the next year, 1973. We had Raymond Floyd, who had won the PGA in 1969. We had Bob Charles. We had Tony Jacklin, who was a promising English player at that time, had won 2 majors actually by then. And then we had my first client that I dealt with full time was a very talented young woman named Laura Baugh, who the world has sort of forgotten all these years later, but was an astonishing figure in the growth of the LPGA. This girl was beautiful and unbelievably talented. Southern California, blonde, blue-eyed, and just could play golf. Won the U.S. Amateur at age 16. So that was a very fun client to start out with. Your goal as an agent, you want somebody to be appealing and also be a winner. And those two don't intersect very often. So that was a quick introduction to managing a superstar.
And then, you're building the portfolio. You had other kind of key players coming along. Who are some of the guys that you picked up on the way?
What had happened, and Mark, by his own admission, and we quote him in the book, he told me when he first sent me out on the tour, Hughes, we're hurting out there. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I took my eye off the ball in expanding IMG to all these other areas, to other sports, and also growing internationally by establishing a presence in a lot of foreign countries. We've lost a lot of potential clients. I said, okay, like who? He said, Johnny Miller in 1966. I was there at the U.S. Open when Arnold Palmer lost a playoff to Billy Casper. Johnny Miller, as a young amateur, finished 6th or 7th. I easily could have talked to him and his father. I'm sure he would have been a client. I didn't do it. I was too busy. Lee Trevino came along, 67, 68, out of nowhere. I was at all those U.S. Opens where he played well and eventually won. Same thing. I just didn't have time for it with all this other stuff I've been doing. And therefore, it's time to refocus now on the tour, get out there and get us back on the map.
So you went out, doesn't sound like with a lot of training, and you targeted, players that are obviously coming up. And so who are some of the guys you picked up in your early days?
Well, I had a streak of good fortune in the sense that the first guy that I recruited and eventually signed, he left after 1 year, in this case, because his wife wanted her brother, Tom's brother-in-law, to represent him. But this was Tom Watson. And I signed him in the beginning of 1975. At the time, Ed, he was a 3rd-team collegiate All-American. So think about this. I try to explain to people how hard the agenting business is. And I'm sure the same thing applies to entertainment or music. You're scouting for the right people. Who are the superstars to be? And it frequently isn't the can't-miss prospects. A lot of the can't-miss prospects do miss. In this case, Tom Watson was 3rd-team All-American out of Stanford, which meant there were 16 golfers, 1st and 2nd team, evaluated or regarded as better than he was when he comes out. So whatever it was that attracted me to him, he had a great personality, he had kind of a boy next door demeanor, and he obviously could play. He got right on the tour out of qualifying school, signed him, and then serendipity, of course, months later, he wins the British Open. and we did a great job for him. And that sort of reestablished for the first time in years, hey, IMG is back. These guys have put a stake in the ground. They've got Tom Watson, not probably, at that time, the best young player in the game. Shortly thereafter, in 1976, I signed two clients who turned out to be huge in their own careers and for us. Nancy Lopez, who completely revolutionized ladies professional golf. And if any of you young HBS grads are listening to this, you ought to Google Nancy Lopez, because what she did when she came out, her first year, she won 8 tournaments, 5 in a row. And we can go on from there. And then the second great amateur at the time that every other agent was gunning for was Curtis Strange, who, like Arnold, went to Wake Forest and went on to a fabulous career, winning the U.S. Open 2 years in a row, being the first player to win $1 million in official prize money on the tour, and a great friend to this day. So quickly, I experienced, thanks to luck and some, doing my homework and working hard, we had 3 pretty exciting people heading the lineup of IMG clients. And then it kind of went from there, and going into the 80s, just fast forward, Greg Norman was somebody in the early 80s who'd been a star internationally, and everybody had their eye on him. He had a manager to begin with that beat us to the punch. That guy got him into some weird tax structures and international sort of messes. That was appealing. And of course, we were the only company with offices everywhere where Greg played golf: Australia, Asia, Europe. And that was appealing. So I signed Greg and represented him for 11 years. Following that, David Duval was #1 in the world, won the British Open. He was a kid out of Georgia Tech, again, very promising, and delivered on that, won the Players Championship. And then the last scouting success, and believe me, there were many failures in between the lines here, with people that didn't pan out, or people that I missed. But the last and most dramatic one was Tiger Woods, who I started scouting when he was 12 years old. And we traced that, chronicled that all the way through the book. When I first knocked on his parents' house door in 1989, he was 12 years old and was riding his bike around the neighborhood. And that's how early sometimes you have to start your pitch.
Wow. Let's go back to Greg Norman. I dealt with Greg. He was one of our spokespeople at MaxFly. I mean, incredible, aura around him as a personality. Not only was he obviously a phenomenal golfer, but he was very successful in creating all these businesses about him. How was it like dealing with Greg?
I've always referred to him as golf's first real rock star. I mean, he was bigger than life, Ed. You remember, he's blonde, broad-shouldered, piercing blue eyes, great sense of humor, Aussie charm, commanded the room. The media loved him. Swashbuckling guy, lived life to the fullest. Garage full of Ferraris. Just one of those bigger than life type of people. And he was Jack Nicklaus described him once as, and remember, this is the persimmon area, and I guess our younger participants today will have to Google that one too, Mr. Hughes. But playing equipment that's a far cry, shall we say, from today's golf clubs and golf balls. Nicklaus himself, the greatest, straightest driver of the golf ball, said Greg Norman is the longest, straightest driver off the tee of the golf ball that's ever lived. And Nicklaus lived through the era of Ben Hogan and all the way through. So high praise indeed. But Greg was a winner, had a number of unlucky, finishes to major championships. I say this in the book, it's sort of ironic, not meant at a jab at Greg, but he's fronting the Saudi tour, the Live Tour, LIV, which is, of course, 54 in Roman numerals. Sadly, had major championships been only 54 holes instead of 72, Greg Norman would have won 5 more major championships, because he had the lead so many times, you remember, on Sunday going into the final round. And he only won 2 of them. But he was a great guy to be around, many, many fun times together around the world. And again, an agent's dream is to represent somebody who not only is super talented. Greg was #1 in the world for 331 straight weeks. And but has charisma, has it. People always say, what is it, Hughes? What is it that you and agents are looking for? I can't really define it, but I'll tell you this much. Greg Norman checked a lot of boxes for having it.
Oh, yeah, I mean, totally. So, but he also, off the golf course, I mean, he created, he's got his golf course design business, he's got his seed business, he's got the Shark apparel, which he did with Reebok, he's got the wine business. Were you part of that, kind of setting some of those things in place? Because, I mean, he's created a business empire, not just a golf personality.
We did. We started him in golf course design through a joint venture with our IMG office in Sydney, Australia. A guy named James Erskine, very talented executive, and that started Greg 50-50 deal with IMG. Let's see if we can do course design together. That led to a lot of worldwide success, which he carried on after leaving IMG. Reebok, that's one of the best deals that I ever did for anyone. People talk about the Nike and Titleist contracts that I did for Tiger before he turned pro, but the Reebok deal was sensational. One of the reasons being that the mark we created, and this gets into your area, Ed, where you did a lot of stuff with trademarks and logos and stuff. We called it the multicolor shark.
Yeah.
And we found an artist in conjunction with Reebok who we paid $5,000 to come up with that item, and no royalty participation, which he probably regrets. But it's really one of the great marks, or was for decades. It stands out. It blends into any color fabric because of its multicolor nature. Sadly, it's sort of become in the discount bin these days. I don't know if you've been following it, but virtually no players on tour are wearing it anymore. Reebok's gone through various permutations and changes of ownership. Adidas bought them, as you know, and that's, Arnold Palmer's umbrella has lived for so many years as a mark. And I think Greg and certainly we always wanted that to happen for him. Interesting story. The Lacoste crocodile, most people, when they see the crocodile, if they remember at all that it's Lacoste, they go, oh, that must have been the guy that came up, that drew the crocodile. You'll know this. Rene Lacoste was the greatest tennis player of the 20s and 30s, won Wimbledon multiple times. And the media described him as devouring opponents like an alligator. So Lacoste said, why not? Let's do a mark, and I'll wear it, of a crocodile. So there's a brand that's not only outlived its original genesis, nobody even associates it anymore with the player that started it. And that, I think, was Greg's dream, and our dream too, because that's the sign of a great trademark. And as I said, sadly, it's not there anymore.
Yeah, I know. When I dealt with him, he was always talking about life after golf and what he wants to do out of this. How was he like to deal with it in business?
He was very headstrong, very stubborn. This happens to superstars in almost every sport, not to all of them. Arnold Palmer, for example, always kind of realized that Mark and the company IMG was more helpful to him and knew more than he would ever know as a professional golfer. But I think what happens a lot of times, Ed, you may have run into this, superstars are so good. They're so at the top of their profession. They're so much better than anybody. They know more, seemingly, about the game. If they're not careful, they tend to think the same way about other enterprises and walks of life that they might want to get into. Oh, I know everything about politics. I know everything about golf. I can be a business tycoon. There've been some pretty dramatic failures in that arena. People won't remember this, but when Jack Nicklaus, after 10 years with IMG, decided to go out on his own and have his own team of advisors in Columbus, he skirted bankruptcy twice. These guys in Columbus, they were cronies, pals, friends of his growing up, meant well, I'm sure, but on two occasions they had Jack personally guarantee real estate investments. And, that was McCormick's early rule for all of us. Never put your client's money at stake in any venture, no matter what it is. There's too many things can go wrong. So, and lately Jack has been in litigation. You've probably been following it, with a guy that ended up buying the rights to the Golden Bear, and Jack ended up suing him. So it doesn't have to end that way, but frequently superstars 8-10 years down the road, and this was the story of Greg, kind of think to themselves, I've been in all the meetings. I know how this works. I've read all the contracts. Hughes has done this for me. I can do it myself and save the commission.
And was that focus of, okay, let me save the commission from IMG, so I'm just going to hire somebody in-house, it's going to be cheaper?
With Greg's case, we made him so much money. I think that was secondary, or maybe not present at all. It was just this desire to be the chairman. Hey, and a couple of times Greg asked me to come work for him, to leave IMG and become the president of Great White Shark Enterprises, which was the company we created for him. And I kept saying to him, Greg, this is not in your best interest. I'm flattered. I think that would be very cool. And maybe you'd even pay me more money than I'm making now, but it is not in your best interest to do this, because I'm one guy. And when you and I are sleeping, Greg, IMG people in Sydney and Tokyo are going down to the office to work and generate money for you. This makes no sense. But he didn't want to hear that, or wasn't interested, because he wanted more than anything else to be the chairman, to sit at the end of the table and have people working for him and kind of telling them what to do. So understandable.
Now, and Arnold was the opposite. I read something the other day when you talk about logos, that the umbrella that's still on the Arizona iced tea deal is still making his estate $20 million a year. It's unbelievable. This one going to be one of the greatest deals in sports history.
Yeah, would not be surprised. And he's through very careful management. And if anything, McCormick was conservative. Okay. Was always willing to take a gamble on new enterprises, and empowered us as senior guys in the company to take chances and spend the company money if we thought something was worth doing. And we were successful sometimes, and sometimes we weren't. But when it came to client affairs, Mark's sort of mantra to us was, peace of mind is so important for professional athlete. If the athlete has peace of mind, that is financial affairs, that is off the course endorsements, that the rest of his life away from the playing field is being properly handled, it inevitably contributes to greater success on that playing field. And I truly believe in that. That's what we always tried to do, Ed, as agents at IMG. And so Arnold, decided to stick with that approach, and others, Nicholas, Norman, the number of golfers, for example, that have gone this route that we just described, wanting to do their own thing. Johnny Miller did it after 6 or 7 years with his first agent. Lee Trevino did it twice. Seve Ballesteros did it. Tom Watson did it. We had him for a year. He wanted to go have his brother-in-law run it. And most recently, Rory McIlroy has done that a couple of times. And he has his own team, as they now call it, doing his stuff. So it's sort of, yes, Greg Norman fired me after 11 years, but I always felt better about that one because of what I just described. Sometimes it's just inevitable. The great players want to do it on their own.
How did Mark McCormick take the fact that you had some of these high-profile guys fire you?
Well, he understood it. He himself had essentially been fired by Jack 10 years into his relationship. And interestingly, Mark always gave credit where it was due, and admitted, he said, look, I did not have the time and attention for Jack, which he deserved, because he was surpassing Arnold on the golf course. And yet my first loyalty always had to be to Arnold. And Jack did the right thing. He said, if I'd fought it, I would have won the battle and lost the war. So Mark even understood it. And in my case, when Greg fired me, that was 20 years down the road in my career. He replaced me as head of the golf division at IMG. I was still representing players, but he put another guy in. And a lot of this book is, and it happens in every life. Mm-hmm. I'm sure in yours, and at pretty much everybody listening. I say in the book, nobody goes through life undefeated. Right. So I had these enormous successes, then I had failure, and my job was my division head was taken away from me. I came back with more success with Tiger, enormous success, and that was due to luck and some resilience on my part. So all of these factors that we all have in our lives. There was a lot of greed involved along the way, and ultimately betrayal by some people within the company, and really by Tiger himself. So all these elements are in the book, which is almost fiction if you think about it, but right. It's real. It happened to me, And I try to tell the story as you know, as openly and as without rancor as I can. You've read the book. I hope it came across that way. I'm not trying to settle scores here. I'm just trying to tell what happened.
So let's switch and talk about Tiger. All right. So you said that you were kind of scouting him from an early age, right? You know, when he was 12, 13 or something like that or whatever.
Well,
How did that all come about?
again, for the youngsters, the relative youngsters in our audience, in those days we used to collect newspaper and magazine clippings about young can't miss prospects and stars to be. And I was meticulous about that, I guess, and I kept a file on a lot of people, many of whom no one's ever heard of because they didn't pan out. But Tiger, from the very beginning, was special. You know, he goes on the Mike Douglas show at age 3 with his dad. They still play that footage sometimes. I mean, he was just from the very first time he picked up a golf club, it was just genius. And so he had won a bunch of Southern California tournaments. I was keeping track of that. I was out in LA on a business trip. We had some meetings in Los Angeles, and I decided to take a flyer. Before I left on that trip, I called another Google item. I looked in the phone booth and the phone book. I looked up Earl Woods, Cypress, California. I didn't even know where Cypress was. And called him and said, look, I'm going to be in the area. Can I come by and just see you guys? This is who I am. This is what we do. And so that led to that meeting at their house. There was no sales pitch at the time because I'm thinking to myself, this kid is 12 years old. If he finishes college, it'll be 10 years from now. And most golfers did finish college in those days before they turned pro. It's going to be at least 10 years. This is just an introductory meeting. Who knows where it's going to go? I'll kind of put it in the back burner for a while and just know that you've made the initial contact. So one thing led to another. Tiger's amateur career exploded like no one in history, including even Bobby Jones. I've said to people many times, Ed, that for all of his professional greatness and achievements, which are many, the greatest part of Tiger's career was as an amateur, when from age 14 until 19, he won 6 consecutive United States Golf Association amateur championships. And 3 of them were juniors, which are for kids under 17, and the other 3 were U.S. amateurs for any age. And those are all match play events, as you know. Mm-hmm. And sure, there was some luck involved. I mean, he was behind in the finals almost every one of those tournaments, but he always came back. He won them all in succession. No one's ever won 3 juniors in a row, and no one's ever won 3 amateurs in a row, and he did both. So it was pretty clear along the way, and our relationship grew in those years. And we can talk about some of that if you like, and kind of what we did to further court the Woods family. But it was sort of, yeah, there's a lot of can't miss guys that have, but this kid's very special.
Okay, so how did you court that family? Because that was a long dating process before you turned pro, right? I mean, you were a patient guy. So what were you doing in that to, wait? Because you don't make any money until he turns pro, right? You can't technically sign an agreement with an amateur.
Correct, you are. And one of the major things that we did, I thought about it one day driving home from the office. I thought, we don't have anybody out on the amateur circuit really scouting these kids as they come along. We read about it in the paper and in the golf magazines, but we really don't have any presence, somebody with decent eyes and perspective to kind of identify who some of the good ones coming along are. And we didn't have any of that on the college circuit or the amateur circuit. We certainly didn't have it on the junior circuit, which is what Tiger was playing in the years 91, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I thought to myself, wow, Earl Woods, because Tiger was, still 15 years old, 16, Earl Woods traveled with Tiger all over the country.
Right.
That's 2 plane tickets, hotel rooms, 2 meals every day times 3, expense for which Earl, as a military veteran with a pension, really was not prepared to spend. And it was, in those days, we're talking $40,000, $50,000 a year, right, just on expense. We couldn't give money to the Woods family, as you just referenced. That's a violation of the kid's amateur status. It's also a NCAA college regulation. You can't do that, and Tiger was obviously going to go to college eventually. So what I thought was, what if we paid Earl Woods legitimately, arm's length, to be IMG's junior talent scout.
Okay.
And I ran it by Mark, and for one of the few times, he was so far ahead of everybody else and 2 moves ahead, always a visionary guy. He almost was a little upset that he didn't think of it. He said, wow, that is really a great idea. He said, we have one problem, and that is the U.S. Golf Association. He knew the president of the USGA in those days, a name you'll recognize, Sandy Tatum, San Francisco lawyer who's a great golfer himself. And Mark said, let me run this by Sandy. And a few days later, it came back from Tatum, and the official USGA position was, as long as there's no quid pro quo, Mark and Hughes, as long as there's no understanding that, hey, Earl, in return for you being IMG's talent scout and us paying your expenses and a salary to do so, there's never going to be any agreement, side or otherwise, written or otherwise, that when your son turns pro, he's going to sign with IMG. And there never was.
Okay.
But it was brilliant because it gave us some perspective in a space that we didn't have any at the time. It brought us closer to the Woods family, and it also was meaningful financial help at a time when Earl really needed it.
So we fast forward now. Tiger's about ready to turn pro. You're starting to put some deals together to him. He comes out with this thing where he gets interviewed, I think it's Milwaukee, and he goes, "Hello, world." Is that real?
Correct. It was one of the great unscripted, scripted, or I should say scripted, unscripted lines that was straight out of Nike advertising and promotion, and they are the best in the world at it. Let's face it, in the sporting goods business. I had spent the last year before Tiger, he was finishing his sophomore year at Stanford. He won 10 tournaments as a collegian, just unheard of, including the NCAA championship. And it was clear his game wasn't going to benefit by staying in school. So the family had let me know that they were coming to the end now, and it was pretty close to turning professional. What's your game plan, Hughes, for what we can do? And we chronicled this in the book. And in fact, in the current issue of Golf Digest, if anyone gets that, it's also in their digital space. Golf Digest took an excerpt, and you'll remember they said the whole way I approached Nike and years in advance went to them and set this up and told them I wasn't going to talk to any other companies, that they had a chance to grab the next great prospect in sports, forget golf, and how that all kind of fell together. Fascinating a chapter in our book. So I won't go into that here, but basically we set that up for numbers that were just totally mind-boggling. The top 2 players in the world in 1996, when Tiger turned pro, were Greg Norman and Nick Faldo. And we represented both of them, so I knew exactly what they were making on golf clubs and on apparel and shoes. I also had the great benefit of IMG represented at that time Pete Sampras, Andre Agassi, and Jim Courier, all of whom were tennis stars at Nike. And tennis in those days, Nike wasn't into golf at all, but they were big into tennis. And I got to see with wide eyes the huge numbers that these guys, Sampras, Agassi, and Courier, were making. So I thought to myself, 1 and 1 is 2. Nike's used to this level of compensation. I'm not even going to pay any attention to what the bar is right now for the 2 best players in the world, Norman and Faldo. I'm going to go way beyond that because I know how much Nike loves superstars. They thrive on it. Phil Knight is a visionary, but he's a jock sniffer at heart, and he has to have the very best players in whatever area it was. And I also benefited from, they were just starting to look at golf, Nike. They were just getting into it. So all these circumstances kind of aligned. And we ended up with a deal that nobody believed. In fact, a lot of other agents and media poo-pooed the deal and said it can't be true. IMG's making up these numbers. Tiger Woods is getting paid $8 million a year for apparel and shoes, and Nick Faldo's barely making $1 million. I mean, come on. So it was true, and it was generational wealth for Tiger. We also did a deal which you'd be familiar with at the time. Shortly before I met you at Augusta, we had done the deal with Wally Uhine at Titleist, which was also groundbreaking in terms of, it was $20 million in total over 5 years. So bottom line, before this kid ever hits a ball as a professional, and the risks involved with that, and it doesn't always, 1 and 1 does not equal 3 on somebody achieving to this level of compensation. But he was set for life. His family had generational wealth. And again, peace of mind. He never had to worry about, oh my God, what if I don't succeed out there? What if at first I struggle? You know, a lot of players did that. Curtis Strange missed his card at the first qualifying school, but it all fell together. And it was for an agent, it was the top of the mountain. I mean, it was really one of the most exhilarating things to go through that process of negotiating with these two companies and creating a great deal and wealth and all of it went with it. Was really kind of the peak of my career.
I mean, those were huge, groundbreaking deals. Tiger coming out was huge, and then he actually performs. How
Well,
was
I mean,
working with Tiger Mania? I mean, it was crazy at the time.
and the really interesting thing, and this has all been forgotten, I'm pitching Nike on absurd numbers, and Wally at numbers that he wasn't used to at all, although he had the vision typical Wally of understanding that this was a generational talent, and Titleist needed to get. And if you recall, Titleist was they were a ball company for so long. They were just developing a line of clubs for better players. So it was, again, luck. It was perfect alignment. But what people have forgotten, Tiger Woods, Ed, as an amateur, had gotten exemptions to play as an amateur in 8 PGA Tour professional events. Guess what? He missed the cut 7 times. So not so much Nike because they were new to golf, but Wally, being the smart guy he is, said, hang on a second. Is this kid just a match player? He's won all these USGA championships. That's match play. Is this what you're asking me to pay, groundbreaking numbers for? Come on, get real. So that was kind of funny in the background at the time.
So he comes out and he delivers, right? And you've got this crazy time frame where everything is about Tiger. How was working with him as his agent, kind of helping manage all that stuff? That must have been just a whirlwind.
It was unmanageable, to be honest. We describe it in the book as a gale force of celebrity, which I've always liked how we kind of characterized it. You saw it, Ed. You were there. It was nuts. It was more than it was a tsunami of media, of fans. He was on the headlines. He was in the news every night, even if he shot 74 the first round at some event somewhere. What did Tiger do today? It was humongous. To deal with it, and he hated it, by the way. Life got very uncomfortable in a hurry for this young 20-year-old. He would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, you may remember this, to go play practice rounds at a tournament site because he thought, well, at least I'll dodge all of it. There were thousands of people out there because they figured out what he was doing. They're all waiting. Can I get a photo? Will you sign this? I mean, he's fighting his way through mobs of people. It was the Beatles.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I remember going to events and it looked like 80% of the attendees were on the hole that Tiger was on, and you go right up to the rope on any other hole, all right, and be right there, etc. But all the crowd followed Tiger, so
Sure.
he had a phenomenal start, and then it kind of went sideways for you with him.
Yeah, and this, and I write about this in the book at some length. We have a couple of chapters on Greg. We have a couple of chapters on Tiger, both deserving because they were really the most dominant 2 players of the last 40 years, and they're so different in their approach and everything about them that it's a fascinating read. But Tiger really was uncomfortable with all this hoopla. He hated the requirements that his endorsement contracts required. And believe me, I knew that about him from an early stage and kept those to a minimum. I used to look at some contracts that Palmer had with similar people in the industry, whether clubs or clothing. And Arnold was committed to twice and sometimes more than twice the appearances and sales meetings and photo shoots for about half the money that Tiger was receiving. But he couldn't stand it. And in the book, I use this phrase, and it's so interesting because it's 180 from Greg, who loved the fame and the fortune and the riches and the wealth and the notoriety. Tiger felt all of this stuff, the $60 million from Nike and Titleist guaranteed for 5 years, was an intrusion, an actual intrusion into his life. all he wanted to do. He was so focused and so centered on himself, and was maniacal about, I am going to be the greatest player of all time. And to do that, I have to practice, and I have to play, and I have to practice some more, and I have to putt, and I have to go to the gym, and then I have to rinse and repeat and do it all over again the next day. And it really bugged him. And I think looking back, which is 25 years of perspective, which makes this book better, I think, I was not sensitive enough to that. And part of the reason was I was 30 years older than this kid.
Right.
The whole 10 years of recruiting, I was mostly dealing with Dad, because Dad was more my age, and calling up a 15-year-old, we'd talk about stuff, but kind of educating him in advance about this world that he was going to enter into, I gave it sort of short shrift, I think, in hindsight. But eventually, and after the 60 million, in the next Tiger turned pro in 96, he fired me at the end of 98. So in that period, we generated another $80 million of endorsement deals with American Express, with Rolex. His favorite one of all was EA Sports, because he was a video game nut, as a lot of kids are. And so it just overwhelmed him, I think. And he just got to the point where he never gave me a chance to express. He never expressed this so I could talk it out with him and hit the brakes on some of this stuff. It just got to, I'm sure he perceived, and he's never explained it to me. That's one of the great frustrations, that he never gave me the rationale. He just said, see you later. But I think that he probably concluded, look, that's just the way Hughes is. He's hard driving. He's focused on maximizing my off-course income, and it's never going to stop. And I did say to both Earl and Tiger, you can stop it at any time. You don't have, we can back out of these agreements if you want to. I mean, I hope you don't, but it never got to that discussion stage. He just made up his mind. And as he's terminated a lot of other people in his life, Ed, sadly, I think, it's just over. And he's not good at confrontation. Ironic, because he's so great confrontationally on the golf course. There's never been anybody better.
No, nobody's been a tougher competitor than him, but
yeah,
he basically shut you out and didn't talk to you, right?
Interpersonally, empathy, he's just so very one-dimensional, actually a boring person at heart, because of this total focus on what was important to him. And guess what? It worked. I mean, if he's not the greatest of all time, he's certainly number 2 to Jack.
So after you got fired by Tiger, what happened?
2 months later, Mark McCormick said, meet me for breakfast here in Cleveland. We did it 3 or 4 times a year on a Saturday morning. Went in, sat down. And we talk about this in the book, I was trying to chart in my own mind. Mark hadn't said anything about it, but I'm trying to figure out, where do I go now if I'm not going to be on the golf tour anymore, which I think Mark and the other senior execs at IMG, they use the word toxic. Maybe you're toxic now, Hughes. Norman fired you. Tiger fired you. Okay, fine. I've got a lot of other talents, guys. What else could I do productively for IMG? And I in the book, I talk about one of the ideas that I put forward to Mark. But we sat down for breakfast. I thought we were going to discuss, what's next for Hughes Norton after 30 years of success, some failure for sure, but a lot of success. And he reached me without a word, just handed me a severance agreement. Shock and awe, I guess, matching the shock and awe when Tiger called me on the phone and said, you're done, which had happened 2 months earlier. So that was a double whammy for sure. Mark gave me, we had no employment contracts, Ed, in those days. We had no equity. Mark would never share equity in the company. In fact, one of the most sensational things he ever did as a CEO, not to the benefit of his senior guys, but was keeping 5 or 6 of us who really drove a lot of the business for IMG with no ownership, with no equity participation. He paid us a lot, but you really don't get rich that way, as you know. But so Mark said, and I started to read this thing. I mean, I really had tears in my eyes. I was like, what? This is what, you're not even going to listen to me staying here? And said, that's it. So I left. I never got any resolution from Tiger. He has not spoken to me, not said one word to me in the 25 years since. The only solace there, as I mentioned, he treats everybody that way, caddies, girlfriends, whatever. That's just over. That's it. And then Mark, I just went into sort of a shell. I got a wonderful, severance agreements were unheard of at IMG. He didn't need to do it. And he paid me a lot to go away. I always thought it was ironic. He was paying me millions of dollars to not work at IMG, but he didn't want me working for anybody else. I mean, it was a non-comp, essentially.
And it's like
you know what?
10 years or something, wasn't it?
It was 10 years.
Which is unbelievable. I've never heard of a non-compete for 10 years. And you get paid like that.
Which I take as a sign of respect, I guess, for me and what he thought I could do if I were competing against him. To be honest, at that point, going through what I did, losing my job, a lot of my identity was wrapped up in that, rightly or wrongly. And so at that point, I really, that sort of soured me on the golf agent business in general. So I never did anything else. And I was lucky. I didn't have to because of this severance agreement. But hoping I'd get some resolution one day from Mark. About 3 years later, he dropped dead and I never got it. So the book for me in many ways has been a cathartic experience. Okay. And by that, I mean, there was so much hurt. And as I mentioned, some betrayal I felt and all the things that went with that, thinking you're doing an unbelievable job for the greatest player of the last 50 years and get fired, for no apparent reason. And then by the only job I ever had, working for Mark McCormick. Getting all that out. And as I say, I really tried to, I didn't write a pity book here. I took great pains with George to really kind of tell it like it is and just let the story be the story as it happened. But it was very good for me. And I got very energized doing it. And I've been holding a lot of this stuff inside for years. So I hope everyone listening gets the book and enjoys it. That's not why I wrote it. It was really a process for me of sort of finalization or resolution, if you will.
Yeah, no, it was a fascinating thing because I knew you in the industry and I saw, I heard Tiger fired you and then Mark fired you and I'm like, okay, what's he doing? I didn't know he was sitting on the bench for 10 years with a non-compete, but that's, that makes sense. Let me, we're about a couple of minutes over, but I do want to cover live golf because one of the things which was fascinating reading the book was it sounds like some of the ideas for this new golf tour came from Mark McCormack years ago.
All of them, actually. It's fascinating. That's one of the real revelations in the book because Greg Norman, for years, has postured that the World Golf Tour was his idea. I came up with this. I'm an entrepreneur. I think outside the box, he once described it as. And this is what golf needs to be global and be a smaller tour where all the best players in the world play against each other more often than they do now, et cetera, et cetera. Mark came up with this concept in 1964, found sponsors, found network television. The deal was there would be 20 players. 3 of them had to be Jack, Arnold, and Gary. The other 27 could be any from the tour. It was a done deal. As he describes it, the money was on the table for a tour that would be so much better for the top players. And the reason it failed, and the reason when Norman tried to do it, 30 years later it failed, was Arnold Palmer. Okay. Palmer's dad was a club pro. Before that, he was the greenskeeper at Ligonier Country Club in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Latrobe Country Club, I beg your pardon. And Arnold always had empathy for the rank and file, the other guys on the tour that hadn't been as successful and perhaps as lucky as he had been. And he thought it would destroy the tour. And he shot it down in the mid-'60s. We talked about it internally at IMG a few years after I joined. Mark brought it up again, said, hey, guys, do you think this would work? And we all thought it was unbelievable. He had things that players didn't have in those days. He had a pension plan. He had insurance benefits. He had salaries. The prize money was twice what the tour was offering. Very, very attractive and very similar to the LIV situation today. And Greg tried to sell it as his world tour in 1994. And at a player meeting out in California, where Greg was pitching this to the tour members, Arnold stood up and said, Greg, don't you think Jack and Gary and I have heard this before and been approached about this before. Look, you guys do whatever you want in this room, but I'm out. I'm not gonna. It'll destroy the tour and it'll ruin professional golf. And he walked out of the room. Well, that was the end. So all these years later, so it's now 60 years after Mark first came up with this concept. We called him a visionary. We called him a guy who was 2 steps ahead of everybody. The Saudis bought it, and of course they bring unlimited resources to this project. And as everyone has seen that follows golf, they poached 6 or 7 of the top players to the point where we're at an impasse now, Ed, and I conclude the book with this: golf better be very, very careful. Mm-hmm. The Masters ratings just came out this morning. I don't know if you had a chance to see those. Mm-hmm. The Masters is always the highest rated golf event of the year, regardless of the drama at the end. There wasn't much this year, but no matter who's winning, it's the cradle of it. It's the special event. Masters ratings are off 20%. The PGA Tour ratings all season, going back to last fall, are off up to 20%. And golf fans, if you ask me, are getting tired and fed up with this greedy, who's going to take the next 100 million from the Saudis to betray the tour, in so many words, and go play over there. And we saw this in tennis years ago with the fight between the Players Union and the federations. It got to the point, Ed, where in tennis, you may remember this, the only time all the best players in the world convened was at the 4 Grand Slams. The Australian Open, French Open, US Open, and Wimbledon. Right. And the rest of the time, they were scattered hither and yon. And guess what? All the tennis tournaments, besides the majors, ended up on ESPN2. Right. Because nobody really was interested. Fans want to see the best play the best. Right. And we have to get a settlement here. If you're asking me what's going to happen, people have said, what would Mark do? Mark would get Yasir from the Saudi Arabia, and would get Jay Monahan from the PGA Tour in a room, and he'd lock the door. Say, you guys aren't coming out of here till we bring golf back together. There's a lot of pieces of that are complicated. I acknowledge that. What's the punishment for players that have left, and how are we going to bring all this together without hard feelings? But golf's on the precipice right here. I mean, fans don't like this. I think they're sick of the greed that's kind of come to the surface. And I think any intelligent person looking at this landscape concludes the same. We have to solve it.
Yeah, I mean, John Rahm went for between $400 to $600 million. I mean, this is astronomical, but he's won enough that he's got basic exemptions into all the majors. So, I mean, it is really kind of tearing golf apart, right?
The latest was, and you may have seen this, a couple of days ago, rumor, it's apparently been dispelled, that they offered Rory McIlroy, who really today is the most appealing guy for my money out there. There's a lot of sort of bland individuals, no disrespect, but people want charisma. They want it, like we talked about. And Rory was apparently turned down $850 million, which is the Saudis' next foray. And Jay Monahan and these guys, I know I'm making it simplistic, that you got to realize you can't win a war when the other entity has $700 billion in their private investment fund. They're deep pockets in spades. You gotta get it back together.
Well, I looked at when Rahm left, and I was like, well, why wouldn't you take the money? Because they're already talking about coming together. So you're going to cash in the money. You've got the exemptions if it takes a year to get into all the big events. So it's a really tough challenge. I mean, I used to think the PGA Tour had a lot of money, but no, the guys behind Liv are certainly plowing money into this thing.
And no matter what, as a footnote, you think of the morals of Saudi Arabia, and sports washing is the term, where they're trying to, the Khashoggi apparent assassination and the way they treat women and blah, 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 blah. Putting all that aside, when somebody offers generational wealth like this, and I mean, 75 to 100 million each for Brooks Koepka or Dustin Johnson, clients would say it to me when I brought really great deals to them. I don't think I can turn this down. I mean, it's setting up your family for the next 6-8 generations. It's crazy.
Huge. All right, let me wrap up with a final question. As you look back at your career, what are you most proud of, and what would you have done differently?
Wow. One thing I was really proud of was winning the AT&T Pebble Beach Championship in 1995 with David Duval, my partner. It's such a thrill to even play in that event, and we got lucky, and I played well for a few days and helped them, and so that was for sure fun. I think, rightly or wrongly, being recognized as, you know, the top anything in any field is I guess something we strive for in whatever job we have. You know, I achieved that twice. Golf Digest put me in their top 36 most powerful people in golf, I think they called it. And the recognition, like Robin English said to you, you know, he's the guy. Yeah. So that was there was a lot of stress with that, and a lot of people didn't like me for that reason. Scott Boras, the famous baseball agent, told me once, I never forgot this, because he gets negative press all the time for holding out his players and asking for top dollar, just like I was doing. And Scott Boras told me, he said, Hughes, he said, if you are successful in what you do in this field, 95% of the stuff written about you will be negative. Just suck it up. Try not to take it personally. Keep doing what you're doing. So that's what I think I was proud of. Kind of wore it as a badge of honor that people thought I was ruthless or hard driving or whatever the different adjectives they used.
We had a few names for you.
to remain unmentioned.
What would you do different?
The other thing was and balance is a big theme in the book, Ed, as you saw. The balance that we all have to create between family and work, for players, for athletes, between excelling on the field and also taking advantage as much as you can to the outside endorsement and income producing opportunities. That balance, some people get it wrong. I don't think I had it right. It cost me my marriage. I think I was so focused on driving huge income for people like Tiger that I kind of lost the plot. So as I look back, that for sure.
Okay. Well, Hughes, thank you very much. You were definitely the rock star behind the rock stars. I mean, you were that Uber agent, the super agent, the Jerry Maguire of golf, or however you want to describe it. But I mean, you changed the game in terms of the endorsement deals these guys got. So you mean a huge impact. So, you know, I want to thank you for the time. I thank you for the book. It was very enlightening to hear, okay, what happened, because I think Jim Nance's quote's the best one, and I'll just read it. This is the most amazing behind the curtain ever written view about the world of sports management. And Jim Nance is the gentleman of the masters and just a wonderful guy. And thank you very much for taking the time to be with us, Hughes. And I know you're going to be getting a lot of people asking to talk to you about sports management, because you helped create that industry. So thank you.
Well, a pleasure, Ed. Privileged to be on the show with you. I saw that list of CEOs that went up when we first started. I'm at the bottom for sure, and but happy to participate with you. Thanks for asking me.
You changed an industry. Hughes, thank you very much. And everybody, thank you very much for joining. Hopefully we'll see you all at the next event. And with that, we'll sign off. Thank you.